Hello YouTube, I'm out here in my garden this afternoon. There's a couple of things that I want to try to get done today. One, I'm going to be moving my greenhouse so it's more in the shade, or more out of the shade, more into the sun. I'm going to try to grow some winter crops of some kale and spinach, possibly some rutabaga, and maybe some, well, I got a kid that's stuck right now, so I'm going to go take care of that and then I'll come back to you. Sorry about that. He tripped and fell and was kind of caught in one of the grow boxes. But anyway, so I'm going to move my little greenhouse, and I'll show a picture of that here in a second, over to some different beds that are more in the sun, and I'm hoping I can grow some kale and some spinach and other cold weather plants through the winter. I am in a more cold of a climate, being in northern Utah, but I want to see how it goes, and if it fails, I'm only out a few cents really for the seeds, a little bit of time, but if it works, hey, I've got some fresh veggies during the winter. So this is the grow bed that I plan on putting them in. This one is just under 8 feet long. It's like 3 inches short of being 8 feet. My tarp over here, this is the greenhouse that I want to move. It is longer than 8 feet. But I have it doubled back. It's probably, I think, a 10 or 20 footer. I can't remember. Yeah, it's definitely a 20 footer because this is 9 feet long right here, and it's at least 2 over that. So I might be able to do this grow bed as well. And this one's a 3 footer. So with all of this, but the issue that I had here, and I really wanted it in this one because it's wider, is it's just in the shade from that fence. And this has been a plague for this growing plot. And the space that I have here in this rental to do growing is I get a lot of shade, not only from the fence right there, but this tree when it's leafed out. I've been knocking some of the branches off to help as I can, but once again, it's a rental, so I can't do too much along those lines. But I want to dig out the soil here on this grow bed before I move it all over. And the reason why is with this method of gardening called square foot gardening, one of the downsides that I found out is that tree roots will grow up into the grow bed. You'll see lots of roots right here, but a lot of these are from just tomatoes and the other plants that I had in here. I had some kale. No, not kale. I had cabbage, but you see right there, they're growing up through the bottom, and this is through the thinnest weed barrier that I had. And they rob the nutrients, and it just robs these plants of everything that they could get, making it really, really hard. So, oh, there's a big one that came through right there. I don't think it will hurt it so bad during the winter because the trees aren't as active. But I want to get it, I'm going to definitely dig it all, them completely out this spring to restart it. And I've had a couple of ideas of how to block it that I'm mowing over my head. But nothing permanent. The big reason why I want to dig them out now is just to kind of help it out. I mean, it doesn't take much. I just basically move it over 2 feet, pile the soil back on top of itself, then move it over. The soil that are in these grow boxes, it's amazing stuff. If you saw my other video, I think of the garden cleanup where I was pulling the tomatoes out of here, the roots can just go through it. And what the soil is, this is called Mel's Mix for the square foot gardening method. It is 1/3 compost, 1/3 peat moss, and 1/3 vermiculite. And the vermiculite, it's a volcanic rock that they superheat and it pops like popcorn, and is very different from perlite in that perlite will float in water, vermiculite doesn't. Vermiculite will also absorb nutrients and slowly leach it back into the ground, allowing the plants to get it rather than getting seeped through down through the grow bed. So it's amazing stuff for growing roots. I really like it. And as you can see, it doesn't clump up. Even when it gets wet, it's still very pliable, and it allows the roots to grow fairly easily. But in order to move that over, I'm going to need to water this bed to get it some good nutrients, or not nutrients, to get it nice and wet. And then I'm going to take this compost that I sifted out of my done bed and just mix it in. And then I'll move it on over and break it up into the square foot sections to plant the different plants. So the square foot sections look like this. I've just taken this screen, or the string, and you mark off 1 foot. In each square you plant a different kind of vegetable. And you want, well, I don't want to get dive too much in the square foot gardening method, but you want to kind of mix them up so you don't have like plants adjacent to each other. That just allows you to avoid pests and other diseases. During the winter, I'm not too worried about pests. I'm not sure about diseases. So I'm actually probably going to fill this up pretty much with the brassica family and the spinach, which is a leafy green. But I'm going to go and get it to that point and then cut back to another video, possibly where I'm removing that greenhouse down there. So to give you an example of what I was talking about, let me move my son's little feet here. If you can tell, these roots are coming up and then they get finer to the tip this way, which means they're coming through the weed barrier that I have down here. And I didn't just throw down weed barrier. I put down 2 layers of cardboard. You can see this cardboard right here that I laid down inside the growing bed on top of the weed barrier. And then, to go even further to try to stop this from happening, because we had the same thing last year. Sorry, kid threw dirt on himself and got upset. But then underneath this weed barrier, I actually put 2 more layers of cardboard. And I was thinking, oh, we're not going to have this problem at all this year. That will keep them blocked down for at least 1 year. No, it's just as bad as last year, maybe even worse. So I'm just trying to pull off some of these here, but I'm gonna have to take them up and redo them again next year. I just take all of this soil out, put it in a couple of totes, and then redo the bottoms. But what I'm actually gonna do this go around is I'm gonna raise them 6 inches and maybe put some sand or something underneath it, something to really, that the roots don't want to grow in, that packs really, really tight, and then try it again. I still want to make sure that I have drainage, so I'm not going to use plastic under here because you don't want the water to get stuck in here, because that will make the soil go foul. But yeah, I'm just moving along, digging it down like I said I was, and adding compost as I go. So I decided to move the grow box that had the little greenhouse over it from here, because the fence right there that was blocking the sunlight, to here instead of using this one. The reason why is this one has more growing space in it than this one, but also this section will get a lot more light here. So this is looking eastward, and if you see that fence right there will block it as it's coming up, whereas that one blocks it down in this area almost all day long. So right here is my goal of having the best sunlight to keep the ground warm, and on top of that, to allow the plants to grow better. This is an experiment, and it is November 25th. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, so I don't know how well it's going to work planting it this late. I'm going to be choosing some cold weather brassicas, so hopefully they'll be able to help it out a lot better. But the roots that I was talking about that are growing up through the weed barrier, here's a picture of the weed barrier. You can see just roots growing on both sides of it. And it is just horrible down in the bottom of my grow boxes. So I went through on this one and I dug it out. And this is everything that was up above the weed barrier. And that's everything that's below there. As you can see, as I pull on it, it's still quite connected. So in square foot gardening, this is one of the common problems because you have really fertile and friable soil that just allows the roots to grow. So roots from plants will grow up through it. One of the ways that in the book that they talk about remedying this is by having a hard bottom that you have a few holes drilled into and lift it up off the ground with a couple of blocks. I might do something similar to that next year. I don't know for sure. I got to see kind of how next year is going to play out. And then we'll decide. Now, one of the things you may have been seeing in my video is these duck and goose decoys that I have in my garden. I use them in the summer to deter birds from coming in and digging up the beds and doing things like that. They work really well for that. We had a bad problem with magpies one year. When I put the goose and duck decoys, I no longer had that problem. But I'm going to go through, clean this bed up a little bit, and throw these into my compost bin and go ahead and erect the greenhouse over the top of this. But I gotta help my son. Something's stuck and he needs help with it. And that chicken's eating worms and other things that I've been finding as I've been digging this out. It's Thanksgiving Day. As I said yesterday, I was working the day before Thanksgiving. I wanted to get this in. It's now in, and I was amazed when I opened it up earlier today. I haven't planted anything in it, but I bet it's 50 degrees in there and it's like 30 degrees outside. So I'm really excited to try planting in it. I'm actually going to take some of these bags of leaves and dress them on this backside just to kind of help insulate it a little bit, because I've noticed as it gets warm, those tend to reflect off quite a bit of heat. I really enjoy this. I hope it works out great. He's getting into it. But I also laid down these to cover these beds just to kind of help insulate them so they don't freeze too hard before the winter goes. I'm going to stack all these leaves on top of them. I'm hoping that if everything works out this spring, I can start planting these a lot sooner. I don't know, because we're just not sure what's going to be happening this spring. Keep you up to date. So I'm out here in my greenhouse, and I noticed that that's popped up, and that's popped up, and there's a couple more things popping up here and there. Now, we didn't sow any seeds in here, so these are weeds, seeds that have blown in or somehow other else got in to the greenhouse. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those. I haven't planted it yet as much as I've wanted to, because it sounds like there might be some changes coming up in our future that would make it so I couldn't get much yield out of this year. We'll keep you up to date on how that works out. But for the square foot garden, this is how easy it is to pull those weeds, get all that root. Come over here, pull that one. No, that one broke off. Good chance that it'll still die. There's another one right here, just a little guy right there. One right here. And I'm not sure what kind of seeds those are. I just know that I didn't put them in here. So to help keep it thermally insulated, since that would be really far to reach back, I put in those jugs of water, and that keeps this thing perfectly nice and warm through that thermal mass. It does look like if I do plant, I'm gonna have to come in here and water again, but this spot is so much better than where it was before. So I think that's one of the things that made my garden it's not as successful, is lack of sunlight. But if we end up having to do a location change, that might change everything for us. So we'll see. Oh, there's one more. I'm out here in the greenhouse today, the hoop house that I built. I didn't get it planted as soon as I wanted. Because me and my wife kind of were worried that we might have to be moving. We talked to my landlord and we found out that that wasn't in his plans, though when he brought up us potentially buying this place, we kind of wondered if he wanted to sell. He was just giving us first option. It was more if we were interested, he might be willing to sell it to us. So I did plant some beets, some spinach over here. I can't remember what's here, so it will be a surprise. And then some radishes, which are popping up really, really good right here. Some more beets over there, and then I have some kale planted as well. And I'm waiting for that to start popping up through. So far, it's been pretty cold in here. I mean, not in here, but it's been pretty cold weather. We're talking in the 30s. Well, today it's actually in the 36, but there was a couple of days when I woke up and went to work. It was 5 degrees. These jugs back here I put in for thermal mass, kind of a way to, that as they warm up, when night comes, they'll slowly let off that heat that they've stored up, and it will keep the hoop house a little bit warmer. And it's been working great. Those jugs have not frozen at all winter long, even though my chicken water would freeze up solid to the point where I had to start putting a heater in with the chickens. But it's actually working pretty good. Being that today's the last day of January, I'm hoping we get something out of these before it gets too close and I have to start working on the rest of the beds, because this one needs to move. I need to at least move it 2 feet toward the south. There's a weed right there popping up. Just grab a hold of it, pull it on out all the way by the root right there. The one thing I do like about the square foot gardening method, it helps me know quicker where the weeds are compared to good plants, because of the pattern in which I plant them. I can say, hey, you're not growing in the right spot, and get it removed. But we don't have too much planted in right now. This is just to kind of get an idea of what it's going to be like growing in a hoop house. I wish I had planted sooner, but I was worried that we'd be moving out by now. It turns out that that's just not true. So we'll see how things grow. And I do have some carrots in here. I think that one's carrots. If that one's carrots, this one's cilantro, roots. I believe this one's beets, and that one's spinach, and that would be kale. Sorry. So that actually looks like it's a weed, but I'm gonna let it grow just a little bit more so I can identify it. Beets, kale, beets, kale. So I think this right down here might possibly be a root, but it might also be kale. I'll have to wait for it to come up more, and then I'll be able to tell. I can clearly tell that those are beets, so these are weeds right here. Oop. You can just see how much I love this ground, how much the root comes out. It doesn't stick. That one broke off a little bit, but it was probably deeper. With a pencil, I could have got the whole thing out. But, I mean, it's warm in here. It's probably in the mid-50s. So I'm going to seal it back up and let it continue to do its thing. I hope it all works out the way that I want it to.